Picture this. You wake up tomorrow morning, stumble to your coffee maker like any other Tuesday, and flip on the news. But instead of the usual parade of human drama, there's a penguin in a tiny suit delivering the weather forecast. Not cartoon, not a deep fake. An actual penguin who somehow learned meteorology and apparently runs the local news station now. You'd probably think you're still dreaming, right? Or that someone slipped something funky in your organic fair trade blend. But what if I told you that scenario isn't as crazy as it sounds? What if the real question isn't whether penguins could run our world better than we do, but whether they already understand something about civilization that we've completely missed? See, while we've been busy destroying the planet with our superior intellect, penguins have been quietly mastering the art of cooperation for millions of years. They huddle together in Antarctic blizzards, taking turns being on the outside so nobody freezes to death. They share parenting duties. They navigate thousands of miles of ocean without GPS, Google Maps, or stopping to ask for directions. Meanwhile, we can't even figure out how to merge lanes without causing road rage incidents that make the evening news. Here's the thing that keeps me up at night, and I'm betting it'll bug you too by the end of this story. What if human intelligence isn't actually the pinnacle of evolution? What if we've been looking at this whole survival of the fittest thing completely backwards? What if the real winners in the game of life aren't the ones with the biggest brains, but the ones who figured out how to work together without ego, politics, or the constant need to prove they're right? I stumbled across this rabbit hole when I was researching animal behavior for what I thought would be a light-hearted piece about funny penguin facts. You know, the usual penguins mate for life, fluff that makes for good coffee table conversation. But 3 weeks later, I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about intelligence, society, and what it actually means to be successful as a species. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. While we're over here patting ourselves on the back for inventing smartphones and space travel, penguins have been running a sustainable, cooperative society that's lasted longer than human civilization has even existed. No wars, no wealth inequality, no environmental destruction, just pure, efficient teamwork that would make our best corporate consultants weep with envy. So buckle up, because we're about to dive into a world where waddling beats walking, where collective intelligence trumps individual genius, and where the real question isn't whether penguins could rule the planet. It's whether they should have been in charge all along. Trust me, by the time we're done here, you'll never look at a penguin documentary the same way again. Let's start with a fundamental question that's going to make you uncomfortable. What exactly makes humans superior to other animals? Go ahead, think about it for a second. I'll wait. If you said intelligence, congratulations. You've fallen for the same cognitive trap that's been fooling our species for millennia. We've built our entire worldview around this idea that big brains equal evolutionary success, that consciousness makes us special, that our ability to create art and build skyscrapers somehow proves we're the chosen ones in this cosmic lottery. But here's where it gets interesting. Penguins have been thriving in some of the harshest conditions on Earth for over 60 million years. Humans? We've been around for maybe 200,000 years, and we've spent the last century actively trying to make our own planet uninhabitable. So who's really winning here? I know what you're thinking. Come on, we have technology. We have culture. We can do calculus. And you're right. But let me ask you this. When was the last time your advanced human intelligence helped you survive a minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit blizzard using nothing but your natural body heat and the warmth of your neighbors? Emperor penguins do this every single day during breeding season. They form these massive huddles, sometimes containing thousands of individuals, and they rotate positions like a perfectly choreographed dance that no human has ever managed to replicate. The ones on the outside gradually move inward while the warm ones move outward, ensuring that nobody freezes to death and everyone gets a fair share of warmth. No leadership hierarchy. No heated arguments about whose turn it is. No penguin hoarding heat while others suffer. Just pure, instinctive cooperation that puts our most advanced social systems to shame. But here's the kicker. It gets even more impressive when you look at their navigation skills. Arctic terns migrate up to 44,000 miles annually, but even they don't match the precision of penguin navigation. Emperor penguins can travel up to 75 miles from their colony to find food, dive to depths of over 1,800 feet, and then return to the exact same spot where they left their mate and chick waiting. No GPS, No landmarks in the endless white expanse. No Yelp reviews for best krill spots. They just know. Their brains, which we consider simple compared to ours, have evolved navigation systems so sophisticated that we're still trying to figure out how they work. Meanwhile, we've all had the experience of getting lost in our own neighborhoods because we relied too heavily on smartphone navigation and the battery died at the worst possible moment. This is where our human arrogance becomes really problematic. We've defined intelligence in terms that favor our particular type of problem solving, while completely ignoring forms of intelligence that actually work better in the real world. We're like that person who insists they're great at basketball because they can calculate the perfect arc trajectory for every shot, but they can't actually make a free throw when it counts. Penguins don't need to understand the physics of thermodynamics to master heat conservation. They don't need GPS satellites to navigate with pinpoint accuracy. They don't need written contracts to maintain social cooperation. They've evolved direct, practical solutions to problems that we solve with layers upon layers of complex technology that breaks down the moment we need it most. And here's the philosophical gut punch that kept me awake for 3 nights straight. What if intelligence isn't about being smart enough to build solutions to problems? What if real intelligence is about not creating the problems in the first place? Think about it. We invented cars to go faster, then had to invent traffic laws because we kept crashing into each other. We created social media to connect better, then had to develop entire industries around mental health because it made us more isolated than ever. We built weapons to feel safer, then spent centuries living in fear of the weapons we built. Penguins never had to solve the problem of global warming because they never created it. They never had to invent money because they never convinced themselves that some individuals deserve more resources than others. They never had to develop conflict resolution because they never built societies based on competition and dominance. What if the real sign of superior intelligence isn't the ability to solve complex problems, but the wisdom to organize your society in a way that those problems never arise? But if penguin society is so perfect, how exactly does it work? What can we learn from millions of years of successful cooperation that might just save us from ourselves? If you've ever been stuck in a corporate meeting that could have been an email, listening to people argue about who should be in charge of the coffee machine, you're going to love this next part. Because penguin society has solved every organizational problem that keeps human resources departments employed. Let's break down the penguin social contract, and I promise you, by the end of this chapter, you'll be wondering why we ever thought democracy was a good idea. First, let's talk about leadership, or rather, the complete absence of it. Penguins have no kings, no presidents, no middle managers with inflated egos and meaningless titles. When emperor penguins need to make a collective decision, like when to start their march to breeding grounds, they don't hold committee meetings or conduct polls. They just sense it. One penguin starts walking, others follow if they feel it's time, and eventually, the entire colony moves as one. It's like they have access to some kind of collective consciousness that we've completely lost in our evolution toward individualism. No power struggles, no campaigning, no penguin promising to make Antarctica great again, while secretly planning to hoard all the fish for themselves. But here's where it gets really fascinating from an evolutionary psychology perspective. Penguins have cracked the code on something that human societies have been struggling with for thousands of years: how to balance individual needs with collective survival. During those brutal Antarctic winters, emperor penguin males incubate eggs on their feet for 64 days straight. 64 days without eating, in temperatures that would kill a human in hours, balancing a precious egg while surrounded by thousands of other males in the same situation. Not a single one of them says, "You know what? This sucks. I'm going to eat this egg and go find some fish." Why? Because their entire social structure is built on what biologists call reciprocal altruism, but I like to call it enlightened self-interest with a penguin twist. Every male knows that his success depends entirely on the success of every other male in that huddle. If anyone breaks the social contract, everyone dies. Compare that to human society, where we've somehow convinced ourselves that success means having more stuff than the person next to us, even if it means destroying the ecosystem we all depend on. We've created economic systems where individual wealth accumulation is rewarded, even when it actively harms collective survival. It's like we took the penguin model and ran it through a funhouse mirror, until we ended up with something completely backwards. Now let's talk about penguin economics, because this is where things get really mind-bending. Penguins operate on what economists would call a gift economy, but unlike human gift economies, there's no expectation of reciprocity, no keeping score, no guilt tripping about who owes what to whom. When a penguin catches fish, they don't think, I'm going to save some for later in case there's a shortage. They eat what they need and move on. When they're feeding their chicks, they don't calculate whether their offspring are worth the energy investment based on some complex cost-benefit analysis. They just do what needs to be done. This sounds naive to our human brains, right? We've been conditioned to think that competition drives innovation, that scarcity creates value, that self-interest leads to better outcomes for everyone. But penguin society proves that cooperation can be just as evolutionarily successful, maybe more so. Here's the data that blew my mind. Penguin colonies have existed in basically the same form for millions of years with almost zero conflict, while human civilizations typically collapse every few hundred years due to internal strife, resource depletion, or environmental destruction. Who's really smarter here? But the most beautiful part of penguin society, and this is going to sound cheesy, but bear with me, is how they've solved the problem of loneliness. In human society, we're constantly struggling with isolation, depression, the feeling that we don't belong anywhere. We've built entire industries around helping people feel connected. Penguins never experience loneliness because their entire social structure is built around physical and emotional interdependence. They literally cannot survive without each other, and they've evolved to find comfort and security in that dependence rather than seeing it as weakness. When was the last time you felt truly, completely supported by your community? Not just liked or tolerated, but genuinely essential to the survival and well-being of everyone around you? Most of us can't answer that question, because modern human society has convinced us that independence is strength and that needing others is somehow shameful. We've built social systems that reward individualism, and then wonder why everyone feels isolated and anxious. Penguins never had to invent therapy, because they never created social structures that make people feel fundamentally alone and disconnected from their community. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is all very romantic, but penguins are just animals following instinct. They don't have consciousness or free will like we do. And that's exactly the kind of thinking that keeps us stuck in dysfunctional social systems. What if consciousness and free will aren't gifts that separate us from the natural world, but responsibilities that require us to consciously choose cooperation over competition, collective well-being over individual accumulation? What if the real test of intelligence isn't whether we can build rockets and smartphones, but whether we can use those capabilities to create societies that actually work for everyone? Penguins didn't choose cooperation because they're too stupid to be selfish. They evolved cooperative behaviors because cooperation works better than competition for long-term survival. We have the consciousness to understand this principle intellectually. So why do we keep choosing systems that we know don't work? Here's the uncomfortable truth that's going to stick with you. Penguins aren't successful despite their lack of human-style intelligence. They're successful because they never developed the capacity for the kind of abstract thinking that allows us to convince ourselves that short-term individual gain is worth long-term collective destruction. Maybe the question isn't whether penguins are smart enough to run our world. Maybe it's whether we're wise enough to learn from theirs. But if penguin society works so well, what would happen if we actually try to implement their principles in human civilization? Would it be paradise? Or are we missing something crucial about the dark side of penguin perfection? Alright, let's get real for a minute. I know what you're thinking after the last 2 chapters. This person has completely lost it. They want us to live like penguins. And honestly, part of me has been wondering the same thing. So let's run this thought experiment all the way to its logical conclusion and see what happens when we try to imagine human society actually operating on penguin principles. First, let's tackle the obvious question. What would penguin-style leadership look like in practice? Imagine if political decisions were made through collective intuition rather than campaigns, debates, and voting. Picture Congress filled with representatives who somehow just knew when it was time to make important decisions, without anyone needing to be in charge or take credit. On the surface, this sounds amazing. No more political theater, no more gridlock, no more politicians who spend more time fundraising than governing. But here's where it gets complicated. And this is the part that kept me up at night for a week straight. Humans aren't penguins. We've evolved something that penguins never developed: the ability to imagine alternative futures and question authority. This is both our greatest strength and our biggest problem when it comes to cooperation. A penguin doesn't look at the huddle and think, you know what? I bet there's a more efficient way to organize this whole warmth sharing situation. They just participate in the system that works. But humans? We can't help ourselves. We see a perfectly functional system and immediately start thinking of ways to optimize it, usually in ways that benefit us personally. So in a penguin-style human society, you'd inevitably have people who start questioning why they should participate in collective decision-making when they're obviously smarter than everyone else. You'd have individuals who figure out ways to game the system, who convince themselves that their personal success is actually good for everyone. It's like we're cursed with just enough intelligence to understand how cooperation should work, but not enough wisdom to actually do it consistently. But let's push deeper into this thought experiment, because it gets even more interesting. What about economics? In a penguin-inspired society, we'd have to completely abandon the concept of private property accumulation. No one would own more resources than they could actually use, because there would be no evolutionary advantage to hoarding. At first glance, this sounds like a utopian solution to inequality. Imagine a world where no one could accumulate enough wealth to buy politicians or destroy the environment for profit, where resources were distributed based on actual need rather than who inherited money or got lucky in the startup lottery. But here's the catch, and this is where the dark side of the penguin model starts to reveal itself. Penguin society works because every penguin is essentially identical in terms of their capabilities and needs. They don't have individuals who are significantly better at fishing, or who have different ideas about how to spend their time, or who want to pursue art instead of hunting for food. Human society, on the other hand, is built on specialization and diversity of interests. We have people who are amazing at growing food, but terrible at building houses. We have individuals who want to spend their lives creating music or studying philosophy instead of contributing to immediate survival needs. The penguin model doesn't have a clear solution for what to do with the human equivalent of someone who wants to be a poet instead of a fish hunter. Do we force everyone into identical roles for the sake of equality? Do we eliminate individual creativity and ambition to achieve perfect cooperation? This is where the thought experiment gets genuinely disturbing. Perfect cooperation might require giving up the very things that make human life meaningful: individual expression, creative diversity, the freedom to pursue different paths and interests. And then there's the question of innovation. Penguin society has been essentially unchanged for millions of years, which is great for stability, but not so great for adaptation to new challenges. Climate change is happening faster than evolutionary adaptation can keep up with, which means penguin colonies are struggling to survive despite their perfect cooperation. Human innovation, messy, chaotic, and often driven by individual ambition, has also created most of our problems, but it's also our best hope for solving them. We need people who are willing to challenge conventional wisdom, to take risks, to imagine completely different ways of living. But here's where the plot twist comes in. Maybe the real lesson isn't that we should become more like penguins, but that we should combine penguin-style cooperation with uniquely human capabilities like imagination and innovation. What if we could maintain individual creativity and diverse interests while still organizing our society around collective well-being instead of competition? What if we could use our capacity for abstract thinking to consciously choose cooperation, rather than being driven by instinct? This is where things get really interesting from a philosophical perspective. Penguins cooperate because they have to. Their brains are wired for it, and their environment demands it. But humans have a unique ability to choose cooperation even when it's not immediately beneficial, to make decisions based on long-term collective good rather than short-term individual gain. The question is whether we're actually capable of using this ability consistently, or whether we're doomed to keep outsmarting ourselves into dysfunction. Let me share something that happened while I was researching this story. I spent a week trying to organize my own life according to penguin principles, making decisions based on what would be best for my family and community rather than what would advance my individual goals, sharing resources without keeping track of who owed what to whom, trying to sense collective needs rather than asserting my own opinions. It was simultaneously the most connected and the most frustrating week of my life. On one hand, I felt more aligned with the people around me than I had in months. Conflicts that usually escalated into arguments somehow resolved themselves when I stopped trying to be right and started focusing on what would work for everyone. But I also felt like I was suffocating my own personality. Without the ability to express individual preferences and pursue personal interests, I started feeling like I was disappearing as a person. It made me realize that maybe human individuality isn't just selfishness. Maybe it's an essential part of what makes us human. So here's the real question that emerged from this experiment. Is it possible to create human societies that combine the best of both models? Can we maintain the cooperative instincts that make penguin society so stable while still preserving the individual creativity and diversity that make human life meaningful? Or are we stuck choosing between penguin-style cooperation that sacrifices individual expression and human-style individualism that sacrifices collective well-being? I think the answer lies in understanding that consciousness gives us a third option, the ability to consciously choose cooperation not because we have to, but because we understand that it works better, the ability to maintain individual interests and creativity while still organizing our society around collective flourishing. But that requires something that neither pure penguin instinct nor pure human intelligence can provide: wisdom. The kind of wisdom that comes from understanding both our individual needs and our collective interdependence, and choosing to honor both rather than seeing them as contradictory. The kind of wisdom that might just be the next step in human evolution, if we're smart enough to choose it. But maybe we're approaching this all wrong. What if the real lesson isn't about choosing between penguin cooperation and human individuality, but about understanding why we've created such an either/, or choice in the first place? Here's the thing that hit me like a ton of bricks at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. We've been asking the wrong question this entire time. The question isn't whether we should be more like penguins or stay human. The question is why we ever convinced ourselves that cooperation and individuality were opposites in the first place. Think about it. A penguin huddle works because every individual penguin brings their own body heat to the group. Without individual penguins, there's no collective warmth. But without collective cooperation, individual penguins freeze to death. The individual and the collective aren't competing. They're literally creating each other. So why have we built human societies that treat individual success and collective well-being like they're in a death match? The answer is both simpler and more disturbing than I expected. We've been operating under what I call scarcity mythology, the belief that there's not enough to go around, so someone has to lose for someone else to win. But here's the kicker. This mythology isn't based on actual scarcity. It's based on artificial scarcity that we created through our economic and social systems. Let me blow your mind with some numbers. We currently produce enough food to feed 10 billion people, but we have 100 million people going hungry. We have enough houses to shelter everyone, but we have people living on the streets. We have enough clean energy technology to power the world sustainably, but we're still burning fossil fuels because someone's making money from it. The scarcity isn't real. The systems that create and maintain scarcity are real. Penguins never developed the concept of artificial scarcity because they never developed the abstract thinking that allows us to imagine owning more than we can use. A penguin can't hoard fish because they don't have refrigerators or the psychological capacity to convince themselves that having 10,000 fish makes them more valuable than a penguin with 10 fish. But humans? We've built entire civilizations around the idea that accumulating abstract symbols of wealth somehow makes us more worthy of survival than people who don't have those symbols. We've created economic systems that require some people to have less so that other people can have more, even when there's absolutely no natural reason for this trade-off. Here's where the wisdom revolution comes in. What if we used our unique human capacity for abstract thinking not to create artificial scarcity, but to consciously design systems that work like penguin huddles, where individual contributions strengthen collective resilience, and collective strength enables individual flourishing? This isn't some pie-in-the-sky utopian fantasy. We already have examples of this working in the real world. Open source software development combines individual creativity with collective benefit. Scientists sharing research data accelerate discoveries that benefit everyone. Communities that organize around mutual aid create safety nets that support individual risk-taking and innovation. The pattern is always the same. When we organize systems around abundance rather than scarcity, both individuals and communities thrive. When we organize around scarcity, both individuals and communities suffer. But here's the part that's going to challenge everything you think you know about human nature. We keep choosing scarcity-based systems not because we're naturally selfish or competitive, but because we've been conditioned to believe that those systems are inevitable. We've been told that capitalism is natural, that hierarchy is necessary, that competition drives progress. But these aren't natural laws, they're choices. Human choices that we can change if we decide to. The penguin experiment taught me that cooperation isn't about suppressing individuality. It's about creating conditions where individual uniqueness contributes to collective strength instead of competing with it. Imagine economic systems where your individual talents and passions are valued precisely because they contribute something unique to the community, where there's no trade-off between pursuing your personal interests and supporting collective well-being, because the systems are designed to align those goals instead of putting them in conflict. Imagine social structures where being different isn't threatening to other people, because diversity strengthens the group rather than dividing it. Where individual success means everyone gets stronger, not that someone else has to get weaker. This is what I call the wisdom revolution, using our uniquely human capacity for conscious choice to create systems that work with our nature instead of against it. Systems that honor both our individual creativity and our collective interdependence. The penguins were never the point. They were just a mirror, reflecting back to us what we've forgotten about cooperation and what we've never fully understood about the relationship between individual and collective flourishing. We don't need to become penguins. We need to become fully human, which means using our consciousness not to dominate nature or each other, but to create societies that actually work for everyone. The question isn't whether penguins should rule the planet. The question is whether we are wise enough to learn from them and then do something they could never do. Consciously choose cooperation because we understand that it's the only way forward. That choice is sitting in front of us right now. Every day, in every interaction, we get to decide whether we're going to perpetuate systems based on artificial scarcity and competition, or whether we're going to start building something different. Something that honors both the individual penguin and the collective huddle. Something that might just save us all. So here we are, at the end of this journey through penguin wisdom and human potential. The question now isn't what we've learned, but what we're going to do with it. If you're still here, chances are something in this story resonated with you. Maybe it was the image of penguins effortlessly solving problems that keep our best minds up at night. Maybe it was the realization that cooperation and individuality don't have to be enemies. Or maybe it was just the weird comfort of imagining a world where success means everyone thrives instead of everyone competes. Whatever brought you this far, you're probably wondering the same thing I've been wondering. Now what? Here's the beautiful truth that took me months to understand. You don't have to wait for society to change. You don't need permission from politicians or approval from economists. Every interaction you have is an opportunity to choose the penguin huddle over the human rat race. You can start sharing resources without keeping score. You can make decisions based on collective well-being instead of just individual gain. You can treat other people's success as your own success instead of as competition. It sounds small, but remember, every penguin huddle starts with one penguin deciding to share their warmth. The planet doesn't need penguins to rule it. It needs humans who are wise enough to rule like penguins, with cooperation, with sustainability, with the understanding that individual and collective flourishing are the same thing. The revolution isn't coming. It's already here, in every choice you make to cooperate instead of compete, to share instead of hoard, to include instead of exclude. Your move, human. What kind of huddle are you going to create? If this story changed how you think about cooperation in society, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more deep dives into the wisdom we can learn from the natural world, you know what to do. The huddle is always stronger when there's room for one more.